Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce today's chair for this session, 2G, Professor M.V. Reddy. Professor M.V. Reddy is currently working at the Institute of Research Hydro-Quebec Center of Excellence, Canada. He is ranked #1 highly cited researcher in Hydro-Quebec. Previously, he has worked at the National University of Singapore at the Department of Materials Science and Engineering, Physics and Chemistry. Dr. Reddy is an invited life member in International Center for Diffraction Data. He was awarded free life membership award. His H-index is 63, over 14,000 citations, and he has been recently cited top 2% highly cited researcher in area of energy. With this little introduction, I now give the session to Professor Reddy for conducting this session 2G, ICON 2021. Sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Shivkumar, and also all the attendees. Okay, so for me it's the morning, early morning. So okay, so I'm going to continue the session. Okay, by introducing the first speaker. So I would like to know the first speaker is around. Professor Franklin is around.
Yes, he's around. Yes.
Okay. Just I'm not able to visit. Okay. First, I'm going to introduce the. Shall I go? I would like to introduce first now. So I'm going to introduce the first innovative lecture by print electronics using the mixed dimensional nanomaterial by Professor Aaron D. Franklin from Duke University from North Carolina, USA. Before I would like to introduce briefly his bibliography. Shall I move to next slide? Is it possible to move, or you want me to share? Next slide, please.
1 second.
I think I have the.
I will stop sharing. You can share your slides.
No, you want me to share?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, because I thought you people are doing, then I did. Okay.
I have the slides, sir. Sorry.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Otherwise, I can open it. No problem.
Yes. I have this.
Okay. The brief CV of Professor Franklin. His interests are nanomaterial for electronic devices, nanofabrication, printed electronics for Internet of Things, IoT. I think this is very important technology for the smart city application. I think the very nice contribution. And also biosensing, also one of the very interesting, useful, what is the research area for all the people. I think that's very useful. And regarding awards are concerned, he is IBM awarded as a outstanding technical achievement for recognition of his work on nanoscale CNT transistor. He spent nearly 6 years in the research at the IBM New York, and his work mainly focus on one-dimensional nanoelectronics with a specific emphasis on carbon nanotubes, transistors, including device scaling and transport studies and device integration. I think this is very important. And presently, I think his H-index is more than 35 and citations are nearly 4,000. So without, shall I go next time? Without any further delay, I would like to, okay. So this is, I would like to introduce I would like to welcome Professor Franklin to give his speech, okay?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And
okay. Since you are in US, I'm in Canada, both for you also good morning. Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Indeed. Let me go ahead and
okay,
try and share my slides here.
Okay, thank you, Arun. Okay, maybe I might have seen your face. Maybe did you visited in Singapore anytime in US? I'm not sure.
It would have been many years ago. I hope I can be there sometime again in the future.
Yeah, because I saw some of your face visible. I was there in Singapore more than 15, 16, 17 years, So that's why I might have seen you. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. And it is really a pleasure to be able to participate in this conference. I actually have a real love for traveling to India and end up being in India at least once a year for either conferences or recruiting. So it's sad to me to only be in India virtually.
Oh, yeah, me too. Me too is the first time for the last 15, 20 years, you know.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's still good to be involved in this meeting, and I'm excited to spend a few moments talking about print in place electronics and the advancements that my group has been making in this space. So a few sort of groundwork ideas here to begin my talk. I want to point out that the background of the research I'll present is related to the use of nanomaterials in electronics. And that means drawing from the unique properties and capabilities of nanomaterials and harnessing those for the application needs of printed electronics. So I'll discuss a very specific aspect of printed electronics, which is this idea of printing in place. And I'll give some definitions to what that means and what the difficulties are, and then try to address this question of whether or not the use of nanomaterials opens a unique pathway towards yielding this type of print in place capability. So when I talk about nanomaterials, especially for those who may not be as intimately involved in their use for different applications, I mostly mean materials that are by their very nature low dimensional. And those are the materials broadly categorized in the 4 quadrants over here on the right side of this table. It also can include nanostructures, such as nanostructured silicon or metal nanostructures that are used a lot in printing. But they have less of these sort of low dimensionally derived features and properties that would be used. I also miss many other categories. For instance, I'll talk about hexagonal boron nitride as a 2-dimensional insulating material that you can use as inks. But regardless of which category the low dimensional material fits into, it offers some unique set of properties. And 4 of those are displayed in this table here, this sort of graphic that I used in a review paper a few years ago. But I admit that I wish I had kept 1 more in the paper, even though it didn't fit in as cleanly into the quadrants that I developed, which is the ability to use nanomaterials for solution processing. All of these attributes that can be advantageous that are listed here are actually still accessible even when you process these nanomaterials in a solution phase. And that opens new avenues in terms of fabrication and overall application accessibility when you actually start in a solution process. And that's exactly what printed electronics is going to derive from. So the directions of using nanomaterials for electronics, I could broadly classify as the traditional Moore's law-like size scaling or effective scaling for transistors. And then there is this new era of often referred to as hyperscaling, which are still generally high performance electronic devices utilized in some form of computing fashion. And then finally, this emerging space where we're looking at fabricating devices for specific application needs. And that would be the Internet of Things and smart cities and other environments that need a lot of these devices. So the focus, as you could probably imagine, for printing is more in this more than more IoT space. And I often give a little analogy to start here talking about printing electronics, because it's been around for decades. People have talked about printing electronics. And what most people don't realize is that when they talk about printing electronics in terms of the market, there's really only one primary component that has actually been printed, and that is the antenna that's used primarily in RFID type systems. So for instance, here's an example RFID system. It's a bracelet that you'd receive. This one was going to a water park with my family, and they gave my kids and all of us a little bracelet. And you used this, it had enough unique identification on it to where you could use it to get into your hotel room. You could use it to make sure that you're taking the right kid from the place. So the specificity was very important and obviously very well achieved using something that was cheap enough that you could take home with you. And when I got home, of course, I cut it open and pulled out the RFID tag to examine it. And I would ask my students, how big is the RFID chip that is the brain inside of this tag? And most people, when they look at it, they would say, oh, it must be this large square feature near the middle. That must be, and it's relatively large, right? But the reality is the chip where all of the brain work is really happening for unique identification is this tiny speck sitting here, smaller than the tip of that pin. And it's actually something that was developed 20 years ago. It's called, people often refer to it as silicon dust, because the few thousand transistors on this tiny piece of silicon have been able to be put through such a mass manufacturing process that their cost is low. They're hardly disruptive to the flexible nature of the substrate. So even though the chip itself is rigid, it offers all of the unique functionality that you need without having to be in a flexible form factor. And so this sounds a little discouraging when you want to open a world of printed electronics, to think maybe we don't need to print everything that we might already fabricate using traditional silicon. And that's what this analogy is meant to represent. It may not make sense to print the RFID chip, but what about other features in the printed electronics space? So if we're going to print things, what should we print other than the antennas in these RFID tags? And the answer is a lot of what we have yet to really realize and capitalize on in our electronics community. It's the additive electronic function onto existing surfaces in a direct write printing fashion. And it's enabling high throughput in what we may do with prototyping or hybrid integration. And you can see the list there on the side. So the types of printer that's used to achieve some of these unique functions or application spaces matters a lot when we're utilizing a certain type of ink and whatnot. And the classification into these two categories is relatively rough, but it works reasonably well. So the first is additive or direct write printing. Just as it sounds like, this is if I'm going to add some printed functionality to an existing surface. This is the same as the printer you might have in your office. You print ink onto a sheet of paper, so you're adding function to that surface, the function being just a visible ink in a certain pattern. The same would be true if I use that printing technique for printed electronics. Roll-to-roll printing is more of a manufacturing-driven approach. This is similar to things like newspaper printing, where you actually have an extremely high throughput process, and it's enabling manufacturing in huge quantities. That is also something you could use nanomaterial inks for, but my focus will be on the additive or direct write printing techniques and what they can bring for the application space. So the printer we use in my lab primarily is an aerosol jet printer. In case you're not familiar with that printing technique, it has similarities to inkjet printing. They're both direct write techniques, but it has more differences than similarities. For instance, the ink is not just extruded in droplets from a nozzle in an aerosol jet. It's first aerosolized, or in some cases it's referred to as atomized. That's pneumatic or ultrasonic, and it gets the ink into this sort of mist in an inert gas stream, guides it out of the print nozzle with an additional inert gas stream at the sheath that helps prevent clogging events at the nozzle, and then prints onto a surface, usually with more fine resolution than you can get from an inkjet process, because it's able to guide the droplets, more fine droplets than the large extruded print in an inkjet. And this versatility is really what makes this an attractive printing technique for use in my lab. We want to use nanomaterials and other nanostructured inks where we can perform different additives, add different additive or binder features to achieve certain properties in the printed films. So the dynamic range of the AJP is really a substantial attractive feature compared to other techniques. And I'll show a few devices here from our recent work, or a few printing techniques. And I'll utilize predominantly a carbon nanotube thin film transistor as the vehicle for representing our progress in this field of printed electronics. It's mostly because of the versatility of this device. It can be used as a multifunctional sensing element. It can be used as a simple digital control type device. And so for that reason, it gives us the ability to analyze materials from dielectrics to semiconductors to conductors, all in a single device form factor. And if you're less familiar with transistors, I provided an example transfer characteristic here. I won't have time to walk through all of the particular metrics that we extract, but it gives you at least some headline view of what we're using in terms of current voltage characteristics to study these films. You may wonder, if you've heard of carbon nanotubes and their use in electronics, why they would be used in printing or how. And this is a little background for you. Single-walled carbon nanotubes, if you were to isolate a single molecule of or CNT, you would find extremely promising behaviors in terms of mechanical flexibility, robustness to thermal strain, electrical properties that are really off the charts compared to competing semiconducting or conducting features. But they're really difficult to work with from a fabrication and a processing perspective. Ideally, we would make devices from carbon nanotubes in these perfect lined up arrays. And that's still something that has some effort to it, but it's not practical if we're trying to get to a low cost, versatile platform that like printing would offer. And so instead, we use the easiest thing that you can make from carbon nanotubes, which is a tangled network or thin film of nanotubes. And even though it lacks the refined nature of an array in the way that you see these comparative SEMs, the fact of the matter is a percolation transport driven network of CNTs in a thin film still offers superb semiconducting behavior, mobility that is actually above the mark for most any other printed material films. I'll show that in a second, and simplicity of fabrication and overall low cost. So if you were to compare one of the most important metrics in a printed semiconducting film, which would be the film's intrinsic mobility, if you compare that versus the achievable on current in a transistor from that material, you could see where these fully printed CNT films would end up matching up. And that's the blue dots that you see here, where organic semiconductors, which have been studied for decades for printed electronics, and amorphous silicon, which is not really even printable in the same fashion, are an order of magnitude or so lower than these printed nanotube films. Meanwhile, the nanotube films, if you don't print them, if you process them with more aggressive means like high temperature thermal treatments, you can actually get them to compete really well with the very popular metal oxide films, which are not printed. These are indium gallium zinc oxide and other metal oxide semiconductors that have very heavy use in the thin film transistor technologies, such as virtually every display that you have to this day is using metal oxide semiconductor thin film transistors. All right, so printing. This is the aerosol jet printer actually functioning and printing one of the layers of these thin film transistors on a paper substrate. You can see a picture of the different inks we have in the lab. And I'm going to try in my last 10 minutes or so to talk about each of these points really briefly with recent results that we have. So first, we've studied things like the film morphology for contacting printed semiconducting nanotubes. In this case, silver is the most popular of nanostructured metallic inks for printed electronics. And we explored the use of nanoparticle, nanoflake, and nanowired silver to see if they generated a different performance result for printed nanotube devices. And you can see, in fact, they did. And it wasn't just the fact that we saw different contact resistance features where nanoflakes produced the lowest contact resistance to carbon nanotubes, but it was also other takeaways from this study, including the fact that the film morphology changed dramatically when using the different nanostructures. And there are certain advantages or trade-offs that came from using one of these nanostructures versus another. One of the more prominent ones that we make use of is the fact that the nanowires, while they didn't give the lowest contact resistance performance, they yielded the ability to have conductive films printed without high temperature curing after the print process. And that's something that we end up making use of in a number of other ways. So other work that we've done, and this is a little bit of a fast history that leads me to this print-in-place electronics that I've mentioned. We first developed a process where we printed every single layer of the thin film transistor using the same printer. And we were still removing the substrate and doing other processing like bakes and such, but still we adapted inks to make use of the same printer throughout the process, which was a big step towards this print-in-place idea. And those devices performed really well. I'll skip by this for the sake of time. I really want to be able to set the stage with the last couple of papers I'll show you that we've worked on based on this motivation. So most people, if you ask them what is meant by printed electronics, they would have the vision that I show in this little cartoon, where someone comes up to a printer, they load a substrate into the printer, they upload a certain electronic circuit layout that they want to print, and then they simply press a print button. And at the end of some amount of time, while the process actually takes place, they would end up removing a fully functional electronic circuit from the printer. This is, I think, the typical vision when people hear this phrase, printed electronics. The reality, however, is far different than that. Most printing, including many of the works that claim to have fully or completely printed devices, make use of a lot of external processing from the printer itself, making what should be an additive process completely non-additive because it requires so much external work that you could never actually insert a random substrate and perform all the processing. So print in place would be delivering on this expectation that we are able to print all layers in the same printer and make no removal of the substrate needed or post-print processing. The first step in that direction we took a couple years ago, where we were able to print in place the thin film of carbon nanotube semiconductor layer and the thin film conductive layer of nanowires. This is reviewed in the paper I'm showing here, and it produced devices that performed exceptionally well. A lot of that was because of the development of appropriate ink additives. For instance, the nanowires printed in much better refined lines in terms of controlled line width with the addition of ethylene glycol, which also aided in the sheet resistance being reasonably low, even at low temperatures and we say center temperature, we're talking about the temperature of the printer platen itself, not any post-processing temperature exposure that's needed. Devices looked good here, but I mostly want to show you a more recent result where we built on those two layers, and instead, and in addition, I should say, we added the printing of an in-place dielectric, which is this hexagonal boron nitride ink. We developed this in collaboration with Cinzia Casiragi's group at University of Manchester. And following the printing of all of those layers on, in this case, a polyimide or Kapton substrate, we immediately were able to test the devices. So we loaded that substrate in, printed all of the layers for the transistor, and then tested them immediately afterwards. This shows you some characterization of the films. They are relatively thick films. So instead, except for the nanotubes, which remain only a few nanometers in thickness, the rest of the films are on the order of microns in thickness. So this is not a device that is nanoscale by any means, even though it's built from nanoscale constituents. In its performance, you can see here, including its performance under flexible strain, was actually quite superb. It showed the ability to withstand up to 1,000 cycles of strain, for instance, at around 3 millimeters of the strain radius. And ultimately, this is able to be pushed even further if we use different types of substrates for the testing. The comparison of the performance with other printed devices. Now, keep in mind, this is the first, and to our knowledge, the only print-in-place transistor that's been reported with an additive printing process. But the rest of these are printed using other techniques. And you can see that in terms of mobility, we compete and actually exceed most any other result with the exception of a high nanotube density result, which corresponded to a low on-off current ratio for that high nanotube density. So in overall composite performance metrics, the process yields very well. and it can be adapted to other substrates. So not just plastic. We showed the same devices printed on paper here, which also perform in the same manner. So the last thing I want to cover, and I'm getting close down to time here, is a result that's coming out here in the next week or two in Electron Device Letters, where we made this print-in-place process work with an ion gel, a very popular electrolyte type dielectric that we adapted for aerosol jet printing. And the result was we were able to show that without any post-print processing, we could yield these devices that were still able to show stable operation over the course of extended bias stress duration. That's a typical concern when you're dealing with organics and just printed materials in general, that there's going to be some stability issues, particularly if you're using organic semiconductors. But we were able to utilize this ion gel dielectric with the rest of our printed nanotube based components, and showed really strong stability over the course of long bias stress in these devices. All right, last thing that I just want to point to is aside from printing in place. Yes?
3 more minutes.
Okay, thank you for that. Besides printing in place, there's also uniformity and stability of printing nanotubes in devices. And we've given some attention to that with this recent paper that we published showing you can adapt the printing parameters in a way that improves the overall device uniformity and stability. And I point you to this work if you're interested in seeing more about that study and what we're able to achieve in terms of overall stability in the long run. So maybe the last thing that I'll just point to as I wrap up here is that our group does a lot of other work in beyond the printing space, but that still connects to this idea of a more than more electronics era. We do work with other low-dimensional nanomaterials for specific sensing applications, for instance, and also other types of printing approaches. For instance, we've done work with biological inks to show that you can actually use these same printing techniques to develop printed features and reagents for certain types of assays, for instance. So overall, I know I've talked relatively quickly, but there's an exciting movement happening in the printed electronics space. Part of that movement, we think, is through the improvement of print-in-place approaches. This enables truly additive or direct write printing to be possible. And we have now started to see the ability to develop inks that allow for this type of printing in place. And nanomaterials are at the heart of that overall capability. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. I certainly don't want to go without acknowledging the folks who actually do this phenomenal work that I just get to go around and talk about. I highlighted in orange 4 of the students that have done the bulk of the work that I showed in this presentation, and also want to acknowledge the collaborators that we work with and the sponsors of the research. So with that, certainly grateful for your attention and happy to answer any questions you may have.
So thank you, Professor Franklin, for your kind, informative talk. In fact, I really am amazed. In fact, yesterday I was giving talk in India and another place till 3 o'clock. So really after, I'm not really ready by listening your talks. I mean, really made me like more active. So thank you very much for a very interesting, informative talk. Do you have any questions from the audience? Maybe later I will raise the questions. So let them, any comments, suggestions from the audience? Okay, so since we have 5 minutes, so I have some few questions. So before I would like to thanks for the organizers and also SRM team for the very informative talks, all the lot of good session. In fact, yesterday also I attended few opening ceremony. So regarding Franklin, this very nice, interesting talk. Suppose, for example, since I am battery specialist, I use this type. Yesterday, some people raised me a question. Suppose if I use a ceramic powder, for example, 15 micrometer, I'm using some 10 weight% of the polymer PVDF binder, some carbon. Is it possible to make it like what they call ink? People, they ask me ink printing. I told that it is difficult because of the nozzle, it will, your ceramic particle is stuck there and it's difficult. With your technique, something is different. Anyway, it is possible, or what is, I know aerosol is like some particular thing is going to spraying. So with the liquid type, is it possible? For just I wanted to, by curiosity, and just raise the question.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate you asking that. And so, if is it possible? The short answer would be yes, because the range of viscosities that you can actually adapt a print process for in an aerosol jet is really broad. And so, even if you're dealing with relatively large particles in the ink, you can adapt the features of your overall printer to accommodate those features and that viscosity. So for instance, the print nozzle itself, the features of this nozzle in terms of nozzle diameter and aerosol flows of the different gases, and even mechanism of aerosolization. If you use pneumatic versus ultrasonic, it can often get you the ability to print larger constituent particles from the printer. And so, not knowing what the specific additives and other inclusions would be in a solution phase ink for those materials, I can't say specifically how that printing should go about, but there are enough knobs to turn for this technique to make it feasible to print just about anything that you can get into a solution phase.
Okay, so in principle, viscosity is the main issue for your case. Okay, viscosity you take into consideration.
Viscosity is a big one to take into consideration. And aerosol jet for an additive printing approach, or really virtually any compared to almost any other printing approach, gives you the most range of viscosity that you can utilize in an ink.
Okay. So why? Because for my case, if you use too much of polymer, based on viscosity, it's not really good. I'm diluting my battery thing. Then sometimes. So anyway, it's very useful technique. In fact, I work with the micro battery long back during my PhD. I think if you develop by layer or something with solid, I think very informative, really useful talks. It is really very, very good, sir. Regarding your another area you mentioned about biosensor. So with the same, depending on your chip design, you can spray it and you can do electrochemical studies, if I remember. Yeah. Oh, it's very, very, very interesting talk. Any other question from the audience? Very simple questions. Okay. If no further questions, anyway, thank you very much for the Franklin for his very informative talk. In fact, really, I'm amazed. I'm really active now. So more from. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
And also namaskar. Like India, we will tell that. Okay. Namaskar. So you have to respect me. Okay. Namaskar. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Shall we go for next oral presentation, sir? Shivakumar?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So,
Please continue.
first of all, you know that first speaker is around?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
If you can upload your PPT.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, battery show. So now I'm going to we are going to start the oral presentation. First presentation by Sukanya Krishnan.
Yes, sir. I'll share my PPT now.
Yeah, please share. So she's going to discuss about the comparative study, the photocatalytic degradation of bisphenol using copper TiO2, what they call as copper doped and nitrogen doped TiO2 and co-doped copper nitrogen TiO2 catalyst under UV visible light. Okay. In fact, this presentation from environmental science and engineering at IIT.
Sir, I cannot share my PPT. This option. Share screen option.
That maybe somebody can activate like she has a like presenter. Somebody can do any IT people. Can you help us?
She is already the co-host, sir.
Yeah. So what you'll do? You'll share screen.
Yes, sir. 1 minute. I got it.
Okay, great.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, and then you make it to full screen, like a PPT. You make it full, increase the font, and then stop.
Is it visible, sir?
No, make it to full, what they call as the PPT. You make it to full screen. Just click that. Okay.
Full screen mode.
Full screen mode.
Yes, I have clicked.
Okay, if not possible, you can continue. So we no need to waste. Okay, that is better for you. Okay, thank you.
It's full screen mode only, sir.
Okay,
No,
okay.
it is not it.
Okay, sir. Can I start now?
It
Yeah.
is not at full screen. Can you again click?
So some problem with internet. So can you move to next slide? Because I would like to know that it will work or not.
Uh,
Okay, okay, okay. Go ahead. Okay, yeah. First you do, then go ahead. Thank you. Because
Okay,
sometimes.
sir. Good evening, all. Myself Sukanya. I'm a PhD scholar at IIT Bombay. Today, I'm here to share some insights of our work on a comparative study of photocatalytic degradation of bisphenol A by copper, nitrogen, and co-doped copper nitrogen TiO2 catalyst under visible light, under the guidance of Professor Amritanshu Srivastav. Coming to the background and motivation, the presence of emerging contaminants are of great concern these days because these are persistent and bioaccumulate in our ecosystem with potential adverse impacts on human as well as environment. The potential sources of emerging pollutants includes pharmaceutical, cosmetic.
Zokanya,
Yes, sir.
sorry to interrupt. Your slide has not changed.
Okay. Is it changed now?
Yeah, yeah. Now it is a semiconductor nanomaterial photocatalyst. Okay, please continue.
Okay. So there is some lag in between, I guess.
Okay, okay. Maybe I'll. What I will do is that I'll try to.
You can first put it
Background
in
and
slide.
motivation slide came, sir.
No. You can first put it in slideshow mode and then share.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it visible now, sir?
Yeah, but
Fine.
not.
So coming to the background and motivation, the presence of emerging contaminants are of great concern these days because these are persistent and bioaccumulate in our ecosystem with potential adverse impacts on human as well as environment. The potential sources of emerging pollutants includes pharmaceutical, pesticides, personal care products, plastic additives, etc. So out of this, one such important emerging contaminant is bisphenol A, which has been used as a raw material for the preparation of epoxy and polycarbonate. They are mainly present as a lining material in our daily care products, water containers, canned food and beverage, etc. So BPA finds its primarily route to the environment by leaching out from the final product containers or during the manufacturing process. So once it reach our conventional wastewater treatments, once it reached to the wastewater treatment plant, our conventional treatment technologies are inefficient for the removal of these type of pollutant. So here comes the importance of advanced oxidation process based on photocatalysis, where semiconductor nanomaterials have been used as the photocatalyst. Semiconductor nanomaterials, one of the most important one is TiO2 catalyst, titanium dioxide, with having high chemical stability and environmental friendliness. But only one limitation is that it is only photoactive under UV light. And large band gap and electron hole pair recombination. The mechanism of TiO2 catalyst involves when light falls with a band energy greater than that of band gap of TiO2, electrons and holes are generated, electron hole pair is generated, causing photoreduction at conduction band and photooxidation at valence band, producing the hydroxyl and superoxide radicals. These radicals triggers the degradation of pollutants. So the large band gap and electron hole pair recombination is the major limitation associated with TiO2 catalysts. So development of visible light active photocatalysts are being a subject to the extensive research nowadays. So there are various methods. One of such method is doping with metals and non-metal onto the TiO2 lattice and making it into the visible light active photocatalyst. One such metal is copper, and another one non-metal ion is nitrogen, where when we dope these metals, intermediate band gap is formed in the TiO2 lattice, thereby reducing the band gap of the catalyst. There is another second generation method by co-doping with metal and non-metal together onto the TiO2, where intermediate band gap by copper and nitrogen hybridization occurs, thus enhances the visible light activity. So there has been no study on the synergistic effect of copper and nitrogen co-doped TiO2 for achieving visible light photocatalytic degradation of bisphenol A. So based on that, we formulated our objective. First one is to synthesize and characterize these three catalysts and to investigate their relative potential on the degradation of bisphenol A and to study the effect of various operational parameters affecting the degradation. Coming to the materials and methods, all the particles are synthesized by Sol-Gel process. Our experimental setup includes the visible light source was blue LED light with 15 watt and maximum wavelength of 467 nanometers, and the concentration of BPA was measured using UV visible spectrophotometer at 277 nanometers. All the catalysts have been characterized with XRD, FTIR, TEM, and UVDRS. In the figure shows the XRD spectra of the catalyst, where we can see the pure TiO2 showed anatase and anatase crystal structure, whereas an additional rutile peak at 27.4 is observed for all the doped catalysts. Also, for copper and co-doped catalysts, additional copper oxide species peaks were also observed. And there is a lattice distortion or an increase in the number of various crystal defects was observed for copper TiO2 because of the larger size atomic radii of copper 2 plus as compared to Ti4 plus. Also, there is an anatase to rutile phase transformation. And crystallite size was calculated by Bragg's equation, and TiO2 was showing maximum of 12 nanometer and NTiO2 of 9 nanometers. Coming to the FTIR results, all the catalysts have shown characteristic peaks for the TiO2 catalyst, whereas additional peak for TiN and CuO has been observed for nitrogen and co-doped and copper catalyst. And there is a shifting of OTiO peak confirming the successful incorporation of nitrogen and copper into the titanium framework. Coming to the TEM images, all the particles are of spherical morphology with average particle size of 12 to 18 nanometers. Then UVDRS spectrophotometry was performed to measure the band gap of the catalyst, and it was observed that a red shift in the optical reflection edge as a result of introducing doping ions into the TiO2 lattice. Visible light absorption is attributed to the creation of new energy level that may be due to the addition of this doped ion. So maximum band gap was observed for TiO2, that is 3.10, and minimum for co-doped 2.95 electron volt. Then successively, we have performed experiment to see the relative performance of these three catalysts under. Yes, sir.
2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
To go. Okay.
So relative performance of these three catalysts, and it was found that there was no obvious degradation of BPA in the absence of the catalyst, that is photolysis, and maximum degradation was observed for co-doped catalyst due to the combined effect of copper and nitrogen resulted in reducing the band gap. Further, this co-dopt was selected for the experiment with various operational parameters, and first effect of pH was studied, where we have observed maximum degradation of 42.7% at pH 8.2, because at 8.2 co-doped catalyst is negatively charged and BPA is positively charged, enhancing the degradation. In the case of effect of catalyst dose, we have observed that maximum degradation of 0.5 gram per liter is observed. As the catalyst dose increases, scattering of light and turbidity of solution causes the decrease in the efficiency. Also, effect of initial BPA concentration was studied to see the kinetics, and it follows Feudo's first order kinetic model. And we have observed that as the concentration increases, there is more accumulation of BPA, which reduces the kinetic rate as shown in the figure. So coming to the conclusion, all the three catalysts were synthesized by Sol-Gel process. Higher photocatalytic degradation of BPA was observed for co-doped catalyst due to reduced band gap, and maximum degradation of 42.7 was observed at a pH of 8.2 and catalyst dose 0.5 with 10 ppm of BPA for co-doped catalyst. And kinetics followed pseudo first order reaction. So further understanding the pathway and mechanism of BPA degradation are in process. And we gratefully acknowledge the sophisticated and analytical instrument facility and ESCA, also Metallurgy and Material Science Department of IIT Bombay for their technical support to access the analytical facility for carrying out the analysis. These are the references. Thank you. So any questions?
Dr. Reddy? Dr. Reddy, please unmute.
Okay. Sorry. A very interesting talk. Do you have any questions from the audience? Any comments? Okay. If no, I have few questions. I would like to know how much doping you have been tried for this one. What is the percentage?
Yeah, sir, we have tried 1:0.5:0.5 molar ratio TI, copper and nitrogen.
Okay. Just I would like to tell you some story about. In fact, this TiO2, I work with a lot of doping. In fact, I finished with 205, 2012. If you remember some RSC advances, you can go to Google and the main problem here, present case, if you want to study, maybe
Sure.
my suggestion is the doping. I think we can go up to some 5% like that because, for example, copper is in 2+. In ionic radius, it will not match. It will, but you precipitate as a copper oxide and TA wood, that is normal. So my suggestion, since which year you in PhD already finished or you're going to finish? You have some time.
No, sir, I am in 4th year.
Okay, so maybe you can read. So why I'm playing some basic studies. Sometimes the problem is with the molten salt approach I've developed long back. So and also, what is surface area you are getting for your material? Nearly 500, 200 or below. How much you are getting surface area?
Below 200.
Okay. Until it's still so why I'm telling you that doping concept is at least you can try for maximum 5 to 10%. If you do too much of doping, then segregation that is not really good. It makes you, so like mess up the system. Maybe try to do less than 5 to 10%. That will be good. Okay. And also, did you see any color change with the nitrogen doped TiO2?
Yes, sir. Nitrogen doped was pale yellow in color, as well as co-doped one is green in color.
Okay, yeah, because that is normal. Because so you have to check that one. Okay, so and also if I remember RSC Advanced 2012, you can put my MV ready. There are a lot of doping have been tried with a simple molten approach. You don't need any expensive like salt. Just put it in an aluminum crucible, put titanium sulfate like that way. I think that is the work I did with long back. So better please refer.
Sir, sure, sir. I'll look into it.
Interesting talk, and then maybe I don't have any other comments. So okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So. Any comments, questions from the audience? If no, then shall we go to next speaker, please, sir?
Sir, 1 minute.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, what is the source that you used for nitrogen doping?
Ammonium chloride. Ammonium chloride salt was used. For copper, copper chloride was used.
So also you can use the urea as a source also. Any nitrogen.
Yeah, we can use nitrogen. Yeah, urea.
Nitrogen containing source you can use. No problem. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we go to next slide? Next speaker, sir. Is okay?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
So can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, stop sharing. Anyway, thank you very much for the speaker for the nice talk. Okay. Now we are going to go for next speaker by Atip Khan. Okay. From Baba Atomic Research, Kalbakam. Actually, he worked with Dr. Subbarao. So he's going to talk about the what they call biological nano bullets for the biofilm control for medical and industrial application. Okay. Please continue by Atip Khan.
Am I audible?
Yeah. It's fine. It's fine. Only just I'm I'm reading the PPT. Okay. Yeah, you're audible. Thank you. Okay, it's very interesting. Okay, shall I unmute? Okay. Yes.
So, so I'm Asif Khan. I'm working as a scientist in Bhava Atomic Research Center in Kalpakkam. And the topic of my today's presentation is bacteriophages. So these bacteriophages are generally the bacterial virus, or they are also called as the phages. So we'll discuss the role of these bacteriophages for control of biofilm in medical and industrial applications. So because the biofilm is a major problem in most of the industries. So first we'll discuss what is the bacteriophage. So first bacteriophage was discovered it was observed in 1896 when a scientist called Hankin he discovered some antibacterial property in river Ganges against the bacteria called Vibrio cholerae, which causes cholera. And in 1915, two scientists called Frederick Fort and Felix D. Herrell, they independently discovered a different category of virus which can replicate only in bacteria, and they called it as a bacteriophages. Bacteriophages generally means they are the killer of bacteria. So these are bacteria. The bacteriophages are the virus that infect only the bacteria, and they multiply only inside the bacteria and using the bacterial biosynthetic machinery. And they have RNA or DNA as a genetic material. And these bacteriophages use the cell surface protein of bacteria as a receptor to recognize their host. So till now, around 21,000 bacteriophages are known, and it is predicted that around 100 million different types of bacteriophages are present in our ecosystem. So this is the STEM image of a bacteriophage. So it is around 15 nanometer in size. And this is the a lot of bacteriophages which is attached to the surface of bacteria for its killing and infection. So the structure of bacteriophages is divided into three parts. First is the head, collar, and tail. So head contains genetic material in the form of DNA or RNA. Collar is the supporting structure for head, and tail is required for identification of bacterial host. So when this bacteriophage is present inside the bacteria, they will infect and increase their population. But when present outside the bacteria, they act as a non-living entity like the other viruses. So they are highly specific for this bacteria. They will not infect other bacteria. They will identify their bacterial host based on the presence of different types of molecules on the surface of their host. So if a particular bacteriophage identify a particular bacteria, it will infect and increase the population. But if it is not recognizing a particular type of bacteria, it will not increase their population. So this is a short animation of how this bacteriophage infects the bacteria. So when a bacteriophage infects a particular host, it will inject its DNA inside the bacteria and use the bacterial synthetic machinery to synthesize different all the components required for a new bacteriophages, and new bacteriophages are synthesized inside the bacteria, and they will cause the lysis of the bacterial host and release of lot of new different bacteriophages. So the isolation of bacteriophages is a highly economical and cost-effective process because they are present everywhere in the environment, like open water source, sewage treatment, poultry farms, and sewage from local population, hospital water, sea water. So it is very economical. They are present everywhere, and they are highest in number in our earth. So they have a lot of application in bacteriophages, like they have role in research laboratory. They can be used for biosensors for pathogen detection because they will identify different capsules, which are the molecules of bacteria. They can be used for treatment of wastewater of pathogens, like for killing of specific target pathogens. They can be used for killing of antibiotic-resistant bacteria because most of the bacteria are now becoming resistant to antibiotics. So these bacteriophages are the new hope for killing of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It can be used for pathogen control in industries like poultry farm, aquaculture, or cooling towers, for biocontrol of corrosion, or as an alternative to antibiotics and different biotechnological applications. So they can be used. So our topic is how we can use phages for our biofilm for industrial applications. So biofilm for any molecular structure which is submerged in the seawater, they can cause the formation of a conditioning film, like salts of different salts, and this conditioning film causes the deposition of different bacteria, and they cause the formation of biofilm. So, but this biofilm is harmful because it is a slimy layer, and they act as a substratum for attachment of different larvae of marine organisms, and they develop in the adult, and they cause complete fouling of this structure. So, if we'll use the bacteriophages to target this biofilm will not be available for attachment of this small larvae, and this transition phase is inhibited because of the lattice of bacterial biofilm. So these are some of the success stories of bacteriophages, starting from 1931 when it was used in India for eradication of cholera. And recently, 2020, we have the FDA has allowed the fast therapy for COVID-19 patients, and other things like water treatment and reuse for purge-based duct-resistant infections in poultry farm industry. So we have optimized our own protocol for isolation of bacteriophages. So we use liquid samples or solid samples. So in liquid sample, we first mix the water to remove the bacteriophages from soil to making suspension, followed by. Yes, sir.
Hello. 2 more minutes.
Yes. So these are some. This is the protocol that we have optimized. So these are the bacteriophages library we have prepared. Again, different harmful infection causing bacteria that can be used for in medical applications or in treatment of sewage water or hospital waste water for killing of target pathogens. And these are some of the bacteriophages that we have isolated from river Ganges. So these are some stereo to microscopic images we have seen. So we have found that on the region of spotting, there is a complete clearance of a bacterial lawn when at the region of spotting compared to the surrounding area. So we have also studied the interaction of these phages with the bacterial host and found that all the bacteriophages treated at samples showed the decline in 30 to 40% decline in the growth compared to the control, means where bacteriophages are not present. So there is a 30 to 40% difference in past treated samples. So we have also studied the kinetics of these bacteriophages and found that only in 48 hours, these bacteriophages has increased from 100 to 10 to the power 14 in number. And we have also used these bacteriophages for inhibition of bacterial biofilm, and we have found a good result, which shows the complete inhibition of biofilm when they are treated with the bacteriophages. So the final outcome shows that we can show that this can be used for targeted killing of a specific bacteria without affecting the other bacteria of body, and we can use for targeted killing of biofilm forming organisms without affecting normal flora. And different type of bacteriophages can be used to eliminate pathogen or group of pathogens, and they can be used for killing of specific organisms inside the biofilm because these phages have a biofilm degrading enzyme, and this process is highly economical because these bacteriophages will increase in number when they find the infection of their host. So this approach itself is a self-sustainable approach, and we don't need to add bacteriophages every time in any of the sample we have to treat. That's all.
Okay. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Khan, for your very nice informative talk. In fact, we know that presently energy, water, and healthcare, I think these are the 3 global problems to be solved. In fact, you are one of the problems you are solving. So just I would like to, any comments and questions from the audience? Any quick questions? Some burning ideas or any ideas or suggestions? Yeah. So if I'd like to ask you some questions. Since I'm not really a specialist in this area, still I would like to know how do you made this animation? You told that you put that one. How is there any software or just you? What is the way to do that, like animation? They put that this one, and how we can do this one? Yeah. Yeah, animation. What is the way? Some tricks. Just I'd like to know how is there any software? How we can do animation in that? That is the one I'm telling you about.
No, this is just a video of how the bacteriophages infect the bacteria. This was just a video.
No, I know the video you
available.
Okay, freely available. Then it is very good. So I'd like to know that regarding that, for example, this water technology presently. So already you tested the sample. You know that India, depending on the sewage, different thing. How do you know which place is more, or that especially depending on the what they call as the concentration vary depending on which colony. For example, Bombay or your place, Calcutta, and like Chennai or Bangalore. So in particular area is like in concentration of the what they call as waste or fluent will be different when compared to the other area. How we can solve this one? Because sometimes also the elements will be different. Suppose if you work with nearly industry, there is industrial influence, all this one, how can I use the, like, for example, your sensor, like what are the things for the applications?
Bacteria, because if in the sewage water samples, a lot of bacteria is present. So normally we first feed the sewage water to before releasing it into the environment. So it will kill the total bacteria. It will reduce the efficiency of the system, like COD or BOD. So if you want to target a particular type of bacteria which is the most harmful, we can use the bacteriophages, because bacteriophages are highly specific for the bacteria, for their host. So if we kill a particular bacteria without leaving other bacteria, it will not hamper the efficiency of the system. So that way we can use the bacteriophages.
So, do you think so? In water, this bacteria arises due to like exposing air with like atmosphere, or like whatever. Suppose borewell water also you see this type of bacteria, or no? Suppose that we are digging most of the places in borewell water. What is your experience regarding the? I'll take from the river water, and then which is the better and which is the one, because the elements in terms.
This bacteria bacteria is present everywhere. And where the bacteria is present, bacteriophages are also present. Even the bacteriophages are present inside our body also.
Okay. Anyway, a very useful thing. Anyway, I learned something. It is very important for me. Okay, thank you very much for this speaking. If you know burning questions, anyway, I'm going to go for the next speaker. And thank you very much and good luck. Okay, keep continue, work hard, and contribute to the country. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Yeah. So now we'll go for, I think you have to go out and then we can go for last speaker. Okay, I think hopefully last speaker is around, maybe Tunaswani Patra. She's from, I think, from Department of Chemistry, Bhubaneswar, School of Applied Sciences, Bhubaneswar. She's going to talk on what is the effect of calcination temperature and morphology and phase transformation of MnO to nanoparticle, a step towards green synthesis for a reactive dye absorption. It's almost like first continuation of the talk. In fact, speaker is around.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah. Tanaswini, she worked under Professor Tapas Rajan Shahu, okay, from KATT, okay. I think the deemed university, if I remember, is one of the well-known university in Orissa, Bhubaneswar. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tejaswini. Okay, please continue. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Tanaswini, okay. Tanaswini Patra.
So just give me 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, no problem. So since you are a last speaker, maybe we can hopefully all people are not okay. So
Sir, I think
yeah, better you can share the slide. You can go to share screen. Maybe sir, can you activate, sir? Somebody,
Yes. Ranil, make her co-host. Tanaswini, please open the PPT and then share.
sir, I think is it visible, sir?
Yes. Put it in full screen mode.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Slideshow.
Okay, sir. Good evening to all. I am Tanaswini Patra, doing PhD in KIT deemed to be university. And today I am going to present on the topic effect of calcination temperature on the morphology and phase transformation of MnO2 nanoparticles. And that is a step towards green synthesis for the reactive dye adsorption. These are the outlines of my today's presentation. So in the introduction part, I will be speaking about the transition metal oxides, and we have focused on the transition metal oxides, as transition metal oxides are the one which are available in variable oxidation states and have many different applications. They can be used in the catalysis process, in the dye adsorption, in basically in supercapacitor studies. And among various transition metal oxide, we have focused our study basically I have focused my study on the MnO2 nanoparticles. We are interested in MnO2 nanoparticles because they are available in variable oxidation states. They are biocompatible. They have high specific capacitance. They can be operated in a wide potential range. They are non-toxic. And their chemical structures are highly stable, and also they are available in large surface area, which prompt us to use them as a nanoadsorbent for the process of adsorption. So adsorption process means we have to think about that wastewater, and there are, other than adsorption process, there are many other water treatment methods also, which include ion exchange method, biological treatment method, coagulation, reverse osmosis, photodegradation method, and at last the adsorption process, which we have focused adsorption. So what is adsorption? Adsorption is a process that occurs when a solid or liquid solute accumulates on the surface of a solid or a liquid, which we call it as adsorbent, forming a molecular or the atomic film, which is the adsorbent. And why we have focused on adsorption, other than we are also having different water treatment methods, but we have focused on the adsorption process because it is very simple to execute. It is highly cost effective. It has low energy and low maintenance cost. It has good physical properties and can be easily accessible, applicable in large scale industries. So these are the objectives of my work, in which we have to synthesize Mn2 oxides of manganese, that is one manganese dioxide, and another is the mixed manganese oxide, that is Mn3O4 nanoparticles, by adopting a sol gel method using Acacia cancina fruit extract. Acacia cancina, which we all know, is shikakai that we use for our hairs. So shikakai is the Acacia cancina. So we have used it in a greener way. So it is a greener way of synthesis. And then after synthesis, we have to study the crystallinity, purity, and morphology of the MnO2 and Mn3O4 nanoparticles by doing many powder XRD, FEACM, TEM, UV visible spectroscopy, Raman, and TGA. After successful synthesis and characterization, we will also study the dye adsorption of that MnO2 nanoparticles by varying different adsorption parameters. Then we will be studying the kinetics, thermodynamics, adsorption isotherms, and at last we will be, our objective is to study the adsorption mechanism of the dye on the MnO2 nanoparticles. So this is the whole experimental layout, where we have synthesized MnO2 and Mn3O4 nanoparticles. For the synthesis, we have taken manganese nitrate tetrahydrate, and along with that Acacia cancina fruit extract. By using the sol gel method in the muffle furnace, we have synthesized 2 nanoparticles, that is MnO2, which is done at 400 degrees Celsius, which is black in color, and Mn3O4 were synthesized at around higher temperature at 900 degrees Celsius, which is brown in color. After successful synthesis, we have gone for the characterization and the adsorption studies. And adsorption studies were done on the reactive blue dye. Reactive blue, it is a very reactive dye. It's an anionic dye. So we have chosen that dye for our adsorption study by varying the adsorption parameters, like we have varied the pH, dose, concentration of the dye, the agitation speed, as well as the temperature of the dye solution. And then we have studied the thermodynamic, kinetic, and adsorption isotherms. These are the different characterizations which we have done for both the synthesized nanoparticles. The first one is the XRD pattern. The lower one is the XRD pattern for MnO2, and the upper one is the XRD pattern of Mn3O4 nanoparticles. These highly sharp peaks signifies that the powders or the samples or nanoparticles which we got are highly crystalline in nature. And these crystalline and these HKL values which we have jotted down over there, they corresponds to the alpha tetragonal alpha MnO2 phase and the hosomonite Mn3O4 phase. And in MnO2, we can see 2 extra peaks are also there, which we have marked as the asterisk sign, which may be due to the formation of the another phase of manganese oxide, which is Mn2O3. So absence of other peaks, we can say that as there are no other peaks are there, so we can say our sample is pure in nature. And then we have done the IR study, and in IR study, basically the peaks were obtained at fingerprint region, that is below 1000 wave number centimeter inverse. So they correspond to the MnO stretching vibrations. And for the Raman, as weak signals were obtained in the Raman, as the powder color, as the sample nanoparticles which we got are of dark color. So maximum there is the light has been absorbed easily, and hence sharp peaks were not obtained in Raman. So weak signals were obtained, and the signal which is there at 640, it corresponds to the MNO stretching vibrations. And
Excuse me.
yes sir.
Excuse me. 2 more minutes.
Okay sir.
2 more.
And then is that TGA plot. So from the TGA plot, we can see that Mn304 nanoparticles were there, which were highly stable. We have also done the UV visible spectroscopy, from which the band gap was calculated from the top plot, which is there in the inset figure. And then FESCM was also we have done. And from the first figure, that is the FESCM for MnO2, we can see that honeycomb-like morphology were obtained, which shows many cavities, which are very efficient for the adsorption process. But in the second one, that rigid rhombic dodecahedral shapes were obtained, which have no cavities, which are less efficient for the adsorption process. We have also done the HR10, where we have found the particle size of around 10 nanometer, and the d-spacing is 0.69 nanometer. The polycrystalline rings were also obtained, which corresponds to the HKL value of the HRD pattern, which were obtained for the MnO2 nanoparticles. So both the nanoparticles, we have done the adsorption studies, and the adsorption was better for the MnO2 nanoparticles, as we can see from the UV visible spectral analysis. So we have gone through the detailed adsorption studies. These are the different different figures showing the different effect of different adsorption parameters on the process of adsorption. So pH 3 with having low concentration and low concentration of dose and around 200 agitation speed, the adsorption was found to be maximum of around 98%. And then temperature variation was also done, from which the at around 50 degrees Celsius, the adsorption is increasing, means on increasing the temperature, the adsorption efficiency increases. And from the Ventov plot, we got the thermodynamic parameters, from which the delta G was found to be negative, which signifies that adsorption is going on and it favors the adsorption process. We have also done the kinetic study, and from the R square value, we can say that our adsorption study fits well with the pseudo second order kinetics. And as in intraparticle diffusion model, 2 plots are shown, so which signifies that the adsorption takes place in 2 steps. One may be that the nanoparticles may be diffused on the dye molecule, and another, the second plot signifies that equilibrium has been achieved in between the dye molecule and the MnO2 nanoparticle. Then we have done the isotherm study, from which from both the Frontleak and Langmuir isotherm. Our study fits well with the Langmuir's isotherm, because the R square value is nearly equal to unity, and from which the adsorption capacity was found to be around 196 milligram per gram, which is very high as compared to other adsorbent values. These are the 2 FESCM images which we have obtained before and after adsorption of MnO2. From the figure A, we can see that clearly the cavities are present, which were blocked after the adsorption. From the figure B, we can see. And the second one, which is the mechanism here, we have done some theoretical study to know the mechanism of the reactive blue dye with MnO2, where the pi-pi stacking and hydrogen bonding was present. So pi-pi stacking means some pi bonds of the aromatic ring present in the dye molecule. With that manganese, with the vacant d orbitals of the manganese, there is pi-pi stacking and hydrogen bonding between the SO3H group, which was sulfate group, which was sulfonic acid group, which was present in the dye with the oxygen atoms of the manganese. There was some interaction, which was due to which the adsorption was going on visibly. So at last, these are the conclusions where we have sorry, yes sir.
Okay, please proceed.
These are the conclusions where we have successfully synthesized both the nanoparticles in a greener way, and the particles were tetragonal and hosomonite phase. And from the same images, we can say that one will show efficient adsorption, whereas the other is not so efficient for adsorption. And the adsorption studies fits well with the pseudo second order kinetics, Obey-Langmuir model. And the delta G was also found to be negative, which means efficient adsorption is going on. And from the mechanism, we can confirm that some pi-pi interaction and hydrogen bonding is going on between the dye and the adsorbent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tanaswini Patra, for your nice, interesting presentation. In fact, do you have any question and comments from the audience? So if no, I have some few questions, just suggestion, don't think it is a comment. So regarding, suppose if I use instead of your particle, if I use a rod, like for example, MnO2, we know that alpha MnO2, you can prepare, if you use hydrothermal reaction, you will get some, what they call alpha phase, phase. If I use rod, what is the effect? You will get same performance, or rods are not good?
So rods may be good for the adsorption process. We need to see about that interior comments. Are they having some cavities or not? If the rods are just like rigid, then they may not show the adsorption process. Just
Okay.
like my Mn3O4, they were rigid, though octahedral, but they were rigid, so they were not efficient for the adsorption.
Okay, maybe tomorrow I'm going to discuss, especially previous speaker, with some synthesis, and my battery expertise and battery material. Maybe some slides about molten salt. Maybe there you can think about simple.
Yeah,
But
sure, sir.
I told you, because if you use molten salt approach, use some polymer precursor, you can vary by the porous structure like that. Just to see the synthesis technique, it will be useful for you people. Maybe you can attend the talk just for the academic thing. Don't listen to my battery. The other synthesis may be useful for your presentation. Okay. I think
Yes,
overall
sir.
it's very interesting talk, and kinetics also. And also I know that you people are collaborating with SRM, and I understand, I think with the private university, I think you people you have done excellent work and more professional. I think this is very important. I think you are really good, and then keep continue. Good luck. If no other further comments, and again, I would like to thank Tanuswini Patra for a nice talk, nice presentation. So
Thank you, sir.
before ending the session, I would like to make small announcement. So before, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Franklin. In fact, he's also our neighbor with the US. I think it's early morning, he wake up and he presented his nice presentation. In fact, he followed the professional ethics. I think, especially uh, in the in terms of SRM management, and also with the Professor Karthikeyan, Professor Shukmar, we would like to thank him for his what they call as the excellent talk, and he's accepting our especially Indian hospitality, and also with all other three oral speakers. I think they maintained the time and the nice presentation. And thank you very much, and good evening. So again, with now I'm going to like ending, saying that thanks for giving the opportunity, especially the Professor Karthikeyan, and also my co-chair, Professor Shivkumar, for his, I think he's maintaining the time. That is very important. So although simply I'm sitting, so because I was sleeping, he made me, my life is visible. And thank you very much, sir. Okay, thank you. Thank you to all. Okay, and
Thank you, sir.
see you tomorrow. Maybe sometime my talk is there in the same time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Sorry, if any announcement, please make, and or I don't know, or just to see.
No announcements from our side, sir. The session
Okay.
is over.
Okay. So
Thank you.
again, bye bye, and then maybe I
Yes,
can go.
thank you. Yes, participants can leave. Thank you, Dr. Reddy.